I'm Sarah, the founder of Populous, a simplified baby registry platform, and a mom of two. I have a 2 and a 5-year-old, both girls, Amelia and Zoe, and I'm in Austin, Texas. And I'm so thankful for all of you who have given us your time today and trust for, seeking us out and hearing what Jamie has to say. So Jamie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. For the record, I need to come back and we just need to have one of these like conversational chats too, because there are just so many things that we could talk about, including how to deal with the unsolicited advice, because I have plenty of tips for that.
How to respond in a nice diplomatic way.
Yeah. I mean,
or not.
Yeah, or not. Yep. Anyway, so excited to have you all here. Like Sarah mentioned, this is my second time on the Populous platform. The last workshop that I ran was an infant and child CPR class. Quick and dirty background on me. I am Jamie O'Day. I'm a registered nurse, so I specialize in maternal child health care. I started my career as a nurse in labor and delivery, have taught nursing students, have worked on postpartum, and am one of the 2 co-founders of NAPS, which we started in 2011. It's actually our 13-year anniversary on Monday. So myself and my business partner and our team of registered nurses and nurse practitioners have supported women and families from pregnancy through the preschool years for the last 13 years. So just really excited to be here with you all today. I am in Boston, Massachusetts. So I know a few people on here are from Mass. And I also have, I also have daughters. I have 3 daughters. They're 9, 7, and 5. And I'm just, sleep is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I know it's one of your favorite topics to talk about. And I do actually like breaking down sleep into stages. So, today we're really talking about how to get your newborn to sleep longer stretches of sleep at night. But I can talk about sleep at any stage. So like Sarah said, feel free to, the way that I run all of these workshops is always for it to be casual. I want to be able to give you guys information and takeaways that you can take away today and use. And hopefully there's at least one tip that's going to help you starting today. But then also I don't want to say we're scratching the surface. We're getting a little bit deeper than a scratch here with what we're talking about today. But I also want to be able to support you in the way that you need and you want to be supported to reach your own goals. And that is to say, like, even Sarah, you were just saying, like, you get advice from all these different people, and usually it's well-intentioned, right? But you're hearing advice from all these different people because their experience was different, right? And all of our experiences are going to be different. And that's really what we celebrate at NAPS is everybody's experience is different. And there is actually a way to continue to support every family, regardless of what they want it to look like. So this is no different for sleep and being at home with your newborn and trying to get you and your baby to sleep longer at night. So excited to dive in. I'm going to share my screen. I can't see when you make the comments, which is why Sarah said, if you do have a question, just throw it into the comments. Sarah will stop me. I'm totally fine with you guys stopping me in the middle of the presentation to answer questions, to ask questions. I will let you know if it's coming up a little bit later, Sarah, if it's just something that'll be more relevant to touch on later. Okay, but let's dive in. I'll leave plenty of time at the end, you all, where I'll come back out of the screen share so that I can just answer questions that are in the comments too. So if you want to save your questions until the end, that's totally fine also. Whatever works for you, my friends. All right, let's dive in.
All right, I'm going to put your slides up, Jamie.
Cool.
Okay, here we go.
We're good. All right. So how to get your newborn to sleep longer stretches of sleep at night. That's what we're talking about today. Quick disclaimer is just that this workshop is for educational purposes only, and in no way, shape, or form am I trying to replace the care or the advice that you receive from your medical care provider. I think I nailed already introducing myself, so I'll skip this slide and just give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to start with daytime scheduling and avoiding an overtired baby. We're definitely going to talk about sleep being on you. Then we're going to go into strategies for overnight, in particular thinking about decreasing stimulation, what that could look like before you actually get up and feed your baby, what strategies there are there. Trying not to force feed your baby when that may be appropriate to try and get in a little bit more food and maybe not, especially overnights, and then just setting realistic expectations. So let's start with daytime sleep because I really, this is sort of a key component to getting overnights to feel like they're becoming more consistent. So first, when we're thinking about daytime sleep, right? The slide here is titled like flip the nocturnal switch. What the heck does that mean? So statistically speaking, and I know there are a few people on here who are expecting right now, so let us know if this is what you're experiencing. But statistically speaking, when you're expecting, your baby is most active usually between like 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. Right? And so what happens during the day is your baby, like while you're moving around and working or whatever, right? Your baby like has this constant movement inside the uterus, right? There's this constant lull because they're being, swooshed around. There's all the noises that are going on during the day, right? And those noises in utero have this like deep tone volume to them. So all of these factors, right? This tight space, this turbulent movement, this deep noise helps lull your baby throughout the day, right? Then what happens? Like you come home from doing the things that you do all day long, you eat dinner, you sit on the couch, you prop your feet up, you watch a show, right? And I'm binging the last series of The Bear right now, if anybody's watching it. And your baby's like, oh hey, I'm awake. Like you ate, you're sitting down, so I'm not moving around as much. There's not as much noise going on, right? Or maybe you've actually like laid down to go to sleep and there's no noise. And they're up and they're kicking and they're moving. So when your baby's born, right, because of this sort of dynamic of what their life has been like in utero, they come out hardwired to sort of be more awake and alert between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., which with a newborn at home, right, is not ideal for you because this is not when you're hardwired to be awake. So in order to flip that switch, there's a few things that we can do that can help get them to have more of that activity, right? Activity is going to be a little limited here, especially those first few weeks, but more of that activity in those feeds during the day and less activity and hopefully less feeds and less calories in overnight, right? So what that means is first, waking your baby up to feed them. So like you don't need to listen to that unsolicited advice from that, family member or that passive aggressive mother-in-law that tells you never to wake a sleeping baby, right? We actually do during the day want to wake a sleeping baby if they're still sleeping when it's been 3 hours since their last feed. So we're timing feeds from the start of one feed to the start of the next, right? So if the last time you fed your baby was at 9 a.m., they were awake, they fed, and maybe they fell asleep around 10 and they're still sleeping. Well, now would only be an hour and a half, but soon, right? They're still sleeping at noon. You're going to wake them up to get in that feed. Okay. The reason why we want to do this is for two reasons, right? One is we are trying to get in more calories during the day, right? So the more feeds or calories we can get in during the day, the more likely it is that they're not going to need those feeds or calories overnight, and so they'll sleep longer, right? The other reason why it's important is because especially within those, first few weeks, those first 48 weeks, right? Some of you are like right in this time frame, maybe a little bit further out, is if you miss a feed, right? If your baby goes 4 hours in between feeds or 5 hours in between feeds because they were sleeping, it's not necessarily that they slept too long during the day and that's not why they're going to sleep at night. It's because they missed a feeding, right? And so if they miss the feeding during the day, babies are usually going to have like that one long stretch in 24 hours those first few weeks. So if they have that one long stretch during the day, that means that they missed a feeding. They're going to make up for that feeding and those calories overnight. All right. So we're trying to get in those daytime calories during the day. Eventually, what this looks like, right? And now I'm talking like maybe 5, 6+ months out. Is your baby once your baby's sleeping through the night, right? They're not consuming any of their calories overnight. They're consuming them all during the day. So we're slowly sort of trying to work towards that, obviously knowing that they're on an all liquid diet and it's normal for babies to still have one overnight feed for several months. Okay. So that's daytime feeds. With daytime sleep, we're going to cover on the next slide. But what I want you to understand is that for right now, they're going to feed every 2 to 3 hours and they're going to sleep in between every feed. And that doesn't really change until, maybe about like 3+ months. So just that's your schedule right now, right? Like your schedule is they're going to feed every 2 to 3 hours and they're going to nap in between each feed. Okay. I'm going to get into more of like what the napping actually means. What I also want to talk about as it relates to like feeds is once your baby, a general rule of thumb is once your baby has regained their birth weight. So first, let me just define what that means. Babies are born at their birth weight, right? Most babies, especially all breastfed babies, lose a little bit of weight before they actually start to gain weight again, right? And babies are allowed to lose up to 10 to 12% of their birth weight before we're worried about it. Okay. So like all babies lose a little bit of weight, right? Up to about 10, 12%. And then once your milk supply comes in, if you're breastfeeding, then they start taking in larger volumes and then they slowly start to regain their birth weight. Okay. Babies have 2 weeks, newborns have 2 weeks to regain their birth weight. Like that's sort of like the normal marker that your pediatrician is looking for. So once they regain their birth weight with overnight feeds, you don't need to wake them up. And this is where like, don't wake a sleeping baby, right? Once you transition into your overnight sleep, overnight time, which we'll talk about those time frames, then you don't have to wake your baby. They can be your alarm clock. When they wake up and it's time to feed, then you can feed them. So this is where if you get like that 4 or 5 hour stretch, that's totally fine. No need to wake them up. Until they regain their birth weight, most pediatricians will tell you to still wake them up at about the 4 hour mark overnight. Maybe some will tell you 3, but typically, the 4 hour mark, you're going to wake them up, get in that feed, and then put them back to sleep just to make sure that they're getting enough calories to regain their birth weight. But again, regaining the birth weight by 2 weeks or before, and allowing them to sleep for as long as they want overnight. Okay. I have way more that we're going to go into for overnights, but this is just generally talking about flipping this nocturnal switch in days and nights. When we're talking about daytime sleep, right? And now transitioning from feeds to sleep, the key thing that I want you to take away from this is to try and avoid an overtired baby. So most newborns, 0 to 3 months, can tolerate being awake for about 45 to 90 minutes. So especially within those first few days or weeks, your baby might really only be able to tolerate being awake for like 30 or 45 minutes, which is probably the length of a feed, right? So if they're waking up and going right back to sleep, waking up and going right back to sleep, and sleeping 2 hours until you wake them up until the next feed, that's totally fine and normal. People think it's not like adults, right? Where if like we sleep all day long, we won't sleep at night. That's not how babies work, right? Newborns need about like 18 plus hours of sleep during the day. And so sleep during the day actually equals more sleep at night, with the balance of getting enough sleep while simultaneously getting in enough calories. Okay. So these awake windows being like, again, for about 45 minutes to an hour and a half, means that, and that awake window includes a feed, right? So if it takes your baby, 30 minutes to feed, that's part of your awake window. They might only be awake for another 15 or 20 minutes before they need to go back to sleep. All right. This overtired baby, the baby who maybe skips a nap, right? And sometimes this looks like a baby who's crying, like this baby in the picture. They're crying, they're fussy, like they're really hard to get to fall asleep. Or sometimes an overtired baby just looks like that baby who like has that blank stare on their face, like they're staring past you all day long. But either way, in this, the more overtired they get as the day goes on, it's like this snowball effect. Where like the snowball is building and building and building and building. And if they're so overtired going into the night, it actually usually means that nighttime sleep is going to be not great. All right. It's like that's when like the blizzard happens, right? So really thinking about the importance of this daytime sleep is important. So that means, right? I said you need to feed your baby every 2 to 3 hours, right? And offer them a nap, like call it every hour. So truly your schedule is they feed, right? That feed takes 30 or 40 minutes. Maybe they're up for another 20 minutes, and then you're actively getting them back to sleep. Some babies within those first 2 or 3 weeks will be able to fall back to sleep on their own. Like, they feed, you put them on your chest and burp with them, and they fall right back to sleep on your chest. Maybe you swaddle them up and you're able to put them down. But most babies starting around 4 weeks, with peak fussiness for babies being between like 6 and 8 weeks, what the change there that happens, right, or that may happen, is that where maybe sleep was a little bit easier and your baby would fall right back to sleep like right after a feed and then stay asleep until the next feed, now it becomes increasingly more difficult to actually get them to fall asleep. So this is where I'm saying like sleep is on you, like literally and figuratively, right? Like it might be that you're doing a contact nap, like somebody said, they're joining with their baby sleeping on their chest. That is totally normal for this age, right? That's what they're used to also. Sarah, you had posted about this on Instagram, right? Like your baby is used to being in this tight space, like connected to you, with all this movement and this loud, this deep loud tones. And so they're used to that, right? So when you're thinking about daytime sleep, I want you to sort of like set realistic expectations around what that daytime sleep looks like, right? Where it may have been they fell asleep easily right after a feed, now may become more challenging, which means Maybe now you're using your 5 S's, right? You're swaddling your baby, you're turning them on their side, you're swinging them back and forth, you're offering them a pacifier, a finger to suck on, you're shushing them, right? Shh, and you're doing all these things, and you do that for 15 or 20 minutes before they finally fall asleep. That is normal. So I just these are the things where I just want you to understand what's normal and have realistic expectations, because I think a lot of people think they should be able to swaddle their baby up and put them down in the crib or their bassinet and they'll stay asleep there for an hour, hour and a half, but that's not normal. That's not typical. It can be normal. It's not typical. Typically babies at this age nap anywhere from 20 minutes to 2+ hours, right? And a 20-minute sleep cycle is actually normal for a baby 0 to 3 months. So what is likely going to happen is you're going to have a mix of these short naps, these short 20 or 30-minute naps, and these longer, maybe hour and a half or 2-hour naps. Okay. What I will tell you is that my expectation of you is not necessarily that your baby has to sleep on you for every nap, right? This is where you can practice putting them down in their crib or their bassinet and see if they'll actually stay asleep there. If they only sleep for 20 or 30 minutes, maybe then you're picking them up and extending sleep on you, right? This may be that this is where your partner or your friend who's been asking how to help or a family member comes over and they actually hold the baby while you go and sleep. Maybe you're utilizing your carrier and the baby's sleeping in the carrier, so you actually have your hands free. Maybe you're going for a walk in the stroller and that's where one of the naps is happening, right? So utilize other people and tools to help with this daytime sleep so that sleep isn't literally on you all the time. But understanding those realistic expectations around newborn sleep, I think can just be so helpful with setting yourself up for success with daytime sleep without driving yourself totally crazy. Okay. I'm going to come out of the screen share for 1 second because my AirPods are about to die and I want to change them over. Sorry. This is an annoying distraction. Questions while I'm switching this up?
So everything you just talked about is the first 4 weeks.
Everything can you hear me now, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. Everything that I just talked about is 0 to
3.
So everything that I'm talking about relates to babies for the first 3 months. It's just understanding the progression of how it changes, where maybe those first 4 weeks, you have a baby who eats and goes right back to sleep. And you're okay, this feels somewhat manageable, right? Then you get into this peak fussiness days. And now all of a sudden your baby is you're what the hell just happened, right? They were sleeping fine during the day. And now every time I put them down, they only sleep for 20 minutes. And I don't understand what's going on. So when they become more fussy, it just becomes a little bit more challenging, maybe to get them to fall asleep or maybe to get them to stay asleep. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong. This is just a normal developmental change.
Okay.
That tends to get better as you get closer to that 3 or 4 month mark. But really daytime sleep, my expectation there isn't for it to become consistent and consolidated really until babies are 5 or 6 months old. So it can feel like daytime sleep is all over the place for the first 5-6 months. And it kind of is. And so that's why I like to set realistic expectations around what it could look like.
Yeah, I remember both of my girls being very inconsistent day and night. And it wasn't until around the 6-month mark that we started to really think about a consistent schedule. And you're right. So
I think people also think about timing of naps too. You're not going to set times of naps really until your baby's on 2 naps a day, which doesn't happen until 6 to 9 months. So that's why your schedule right now, truly you guys, is feeding your baby every 2 to 3 hours ish, right? Eventually you'll be able to get past that 3-hour mark. We can talk about that, but every 2 to 3 hours, and then sleeping every hour to hour and a half. That's actually your schedule right
now. Okay. Do you see that comment that just came in from Molly?
Yeah, if baby doesn't burp during overnight feed and just falls asleep, no, they're not more. I'm going to get into that, Molly, but no, short answer is no. If they don't burp, no big deal. You're trying to burp for 2 to 3 minutes. If you don't get a burp, you're putting them right back down to sleep. Okay. Heather, I saw your question about tummy time. Again, realistic expectations, right? Tummy time, first of all, you're trying to do it you have a newborn at home. Maybe you're doing it for a couple minutes, a few times a day, right? If there are people on here and they're I've never done tummy time, totally fine. There are probably other important things that came up and tummy time's low man on the totem pole. That's okay. What I can tell you with tummy time is if you are going to do it, I love doing it right before a feed. Can really help with like, especially if you have like a gassy, fussy baby, it just helps disperses any air that may be in the belly before a feed. It can just make them a little bit more comfortable. It also just feels like it's a time where you can fit it in, right? Like put them on a play mat or prop them up on a boppy pillow on the ground while you're going to collect like your water and your, well, I said boppy. So maybe you need that. Maybe you're not propping them up on that, but you know what I mean? You're grabbing your water and your phone and maybe a snack and your breastfeeding pillow and like your baby's doing tummy time while you're doing that, right? Or maybe it's when you're warming up your bottle, right? So just fit it into your day, but don't fit your day around trying to get in tummy time.
Yeah.
All right. Is feeding to sleep in 0 to 3 months setting bad habits? No, ma'am. I'm here to tell you all today, you are not creating any bad habits prior to 6 months. I'll give you guys a buffer there. Definitely not within the first 3 months, okay? So if you have a baby who is feeding and going right back to sleep, and that's working, you're like feeding and falling asleep at the end of the feed, you're good. This is not a bad habit, okay? All right. Hopefully, I'm going to start to make you guys feel a little bit better about whatever's going on in your homes right now. That's my goal by the end of this, is everybody's feeling good. Okay, so let me go back to my screen now that my AirPods are out. All right. So now let's talk about overnights. All right, you're good. We're good? Okay. So let's talk about overnights. So my first tip for overnights, I hope you guys laugh slightly, is do nothing, right? What do I mean by that? Babies, newborns, 0 to 3 months, right? They have different sleep cycles than adults. This changes after 3 months, okay? Their sleep cycles are that they spend half of their night in REM sleep and half of their night in non-REM sleep, which basically means they spend half of their night in deep sleep, or half of their sleep, I should say, in deep sleep, and half of their sleep in active sleep. Half of the night is active sleep. So for those of you at home, tell me if this is what you're experiencing, right? You have a baby 0 to 3 months, and especially if this is your first, like if this was shocking to you. Newborns are incredibly loud sleepers. They push, they kick, they grunt, sometimes they cry, and they're making noises for a long time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, right? A sleep cycle. Mm-hmm. So they're really loud, noisy sleepers, okay? And so what happens, right, when you have a really loud, noisy sleeper sitting right next to you is you hear this, and now you're awake, right, as the parent, and you're like, all right, well, one, you're like, they're so loud, they have to be awake, and you don't even like check if they really are or not, right? Like they're right next to you, you're just picking them up, and maybe before you know it, you're changing their diaper and you're feeding them, right? Or you're like, you do notice that they're asleep, but you're like, they are making so many noises and they're crying a little bit and they're pushing and they're grunting. They must be so uncomfortable. So now all of a sudden you're unswaddling them and you're bicycling their legs and you're trying to burp them, right? When actually their eyes were closed, right? And so if their eyes are closed, they're sleeping. And it really is that simple. So even no matter how loud they are, one, I can promise you they're not uncomfortable, because if they were truly in pain, I promise they would wake up, right? And two, there's only one of two things that's going to happen when their eyes are closed, right? Their eyes are going to fall back into a deep sleep cycle and sleep for another 45 minutes, hour and a half, right? Or they're going to wake up and cry and open their eyes. They're going to need to feed. So my first tip in doing nothing is like, actually just, if their eyes are closed, you're not reacting to them. Now, the hard part about this is what I just described, of like being the parent who's awake, right? It's because in your head, you're like, all right, well, if I'm awake, then like, and I can hear them, like, I'm just going to get them up and feed them, even though I know that they're not awake right now, because I'm awake. And if I feed them, then they'll go back to sleep. And then if they go back to sleep and I go back to sleep, then we're both just going to sleep a little bit longer. Or, all right, their eyes are closed, I'm not going to wake them up right now. I'll give it another 10 minutes, but if they're, still this noisy in 10 minutes, I'm going to wake them up, because then they're just going to be up. Even if I fall back to sleep, they're just going to be up 30 minutes later. I mean, am I in anybody's head? I can remember.
Yes, precisely. And the amount of times I told the folks in the chat, I never ever knew about active sleep with either of my kids. And the amount of times I woke them up because I was convinced they were so uncomfortable with like their milk digesting. They were grunting, they were moving, but I don't remember if their eyes were open. And I was just convinced as a first-time mom, well, they're clearly uncomfortable, and they were sleeping.
Totally, right? And it's like, and there's two parts to this, right? One, as an adult, like you're not making all those noises, so it feels like something must be wrong, right? Like this is not what you're used to.
Yeah.
But also as an adult, when was the last time you had like a severe stomach pains and didn't wake up from your sleep, right?
True.
So
I just had a colonoscopy, so I'm like with you on stomach pains. TMI, but here we are.
Totally though, right? Yeah.
Heather's asking, is crying the exception to eyes closed?
Crying is not the exception to eyes closed. So I get this question all the time. There are some babies who cry in their sleep. I mean, for minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I know what the question is like, but they're crying. So their eyes are closed while they're crying. Sure. But like, look at their eyes. If they're actually awake, like they'll open their eyes and be crying. And if their eyes are closed and they're crying in their sleep, then they're actually still asleep. And plenty of babies do cry in their sleep. I actually I'll see if I can pull it up for you quickly and I'll put it into the chat for you guys when I come out of the screen share. I have a great reel that I made on our Instagram page. It's at Nurture by Naps if you guys don't follow us. And it actually shows like a handful of babies in different active sleep and like how loud and how much they're moving, just to say like this kid's still asleep, this kid's still asleep, this kid's still asleep. So I'll share that clip with you all just so you can see, but crying isn't necessarily the exception to the rule. But here's the thing, right? So I beat this point home, right? Like babies are loud, active sleepers. Okay. That's not actually the problem. The problem is us. We're awake, right? That doesn't feel good. It's not like we're getting more sleep. So with overnights, I actually just like to give tips to help with your overnight sleep, right? One of them that I actually recommend is like actually moving the crib or the bassinet away from you. So if you have it on your side of the bed, maybe put it up against the wall. Maybe put it at the foot of the bed. Maybe put it on your partner's side of the bed so that those noises aren't right next to you anymore. And then maybe add a white, if you already have a white noise machine for the baby, maybe add a white noise machine to your side of it, right? The reason why I like moving the baby away, one, because it, the distance can help with the noises. The other reason is because there's, I don't know if anybody has read Atomic Habits, but anyway, there's this whole concept around like the stimulus and the response and you needing to put like a pause between that, right? So the stimulus being your baby making noises, the response being you're picking them up right away. And if you put just a 20-second pause between that, it usually changes the behavior, right? So I get you're barely getting any sleep as it is. Your baby makes noise, you're just going to roll over and pick them up, right? But if you're underneath your covers, right, you get woken up from sleep from these noises, and your baby's on the other side of the bed, like you're going to lay there for a second and be like, do I really think they're awake before I get up and go over there, right? And that's a good thing. It builds in a little bit of that discernment around like, do I actually think they're awake? Right. And I want to be really clear. That's not to say if you pick your baby up and feed them before they're awake that you're doing anything bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm really just trying to give you tips to help you get longer stretches of sleep at night and your baby, right? So that everybody can start sleeping longer and feel a little bit better. So that's just like the very first part of overnights, right? Is like just actually identifying if they're awake and understanding sleep cycles for newborns. Okay. The other piece of this too is like, okay, maybe now you have established like they were making all these noises, right? Their eyes weren't open. You're like, all right, I'm good. Maybe they fall back into a deep sleep. You both fall back to sleep. And then an hour later, they actually wake up, they're crying and their eyes are open, right? Before you actually get up and feed them, it is actually okay, right? To try and soothe your baby back to sleep first. There's nothing wrong with you doing this first to see if they will fall back to sleep again. Like there's in oh my gosh, what is the French baby book? It has the pause, the le pause in it. I can't remember. Anyway,
I'm blinking.
If somebody knows what I'm talking about, put it in the chat. I have terrible word recall after having 3 kids. But anyway, this is like that pause. So in the French, parenting culture, they actually wait 5 minutes before they go and get their baby to feed them, or a lot of parents do.
Oh, is it bringing up baby?
Bringing up baby. Thank you. So anyway, so there is this like, it is sort of like building in that pause, right? Or can you go over to them and maybe put your hand on their chest, shush them, maybe offer them a pacifier if you're using a pacifier and see if they go back to sleep, right? I'm saying try this for like a couple minutes, right? they're either going to fall back to sleep and maybe only sleep for another 5 or 10 minutes, but I'll tell you why that's beneficial, right? Or maybe they do actually fall back to sleep and they sleep for another hour, right? So now when you were waking up at midnight, now that feed is actually happening at 1 a.m., right? So, slowly trying to extend that sleep. Even if they only go back to sleep for 5 or 10 minutes, you guys, it's not going to feel like a win in the moment. But if you're extending sleep, like I said, maybe it's at midnight and then you get it to like, tonight you get it to 12:10. And then tomorrow night they sleep until 12:10, but you soothe them until 12:20, right? Then the next night they sleep until 12:20. All of a sudden this starts to add up to an extra maybe half hour, 45 minutes, hour of sleep each week. So it is these small steps, but week over week, it tends to start to add up to help getting these longer stretches of sleep and stretches in between feeds, okay? If you're trying to soothe them back to sleep, I mean, eventually they're either not going to have it, right? You're going to try for a couple minutes and it's like clear they need to feed, fine. Or maybe they do fall back to sleep only for 5 or 10 minutes, or maybe they do fall back to sleep for an hour and then they're up and crying again. And it's like clear they need to feed, okay? But I just want to start with like, it is actually okay to try and soothe them first to see if they'll go back to sleep. Again, not saying if you pick them up and feed them when they're crying, their eyes are open, then that's a bad thing. Again, not at all. There's nothing bad about that. There's nothing fundamentally bad about that. It's really just strategies if you're looking for ways to extend that sleep in those feeds overnight. All right.
Hey, Jamie, really quick. We've got about 25 minutes left.
Yeah.
Someone's asking your opinion. Baby in their own room is also okay. Yes, question mark.
Yeah, totally. I mean, obviously this is one of those things where you could ask, maybe 5 different people and they tell you 5 different things. I'm in the camp of, you can move the baby out of your room when you're ready to do that. And yes, there is research to support, like there's a decreased risk of SIDS up until about 4 months of room sharing. After 4 months, there's actually no research to support that is a strategy to decrease the risk of SIDS. There are plenty of other ways to decrease the risk of SIDS, like using pacifiers, making sure that there's like movement of air in the room. So something like a fan, putting your baby on their back to sleep, not having anything else in the crib. So that's all stuff related to the baby. When it comes to moving your kid out of the room, what I also like to assess is like what's going on with the parent's physical and mental well-being. And if one of those things is you can't sleep, like your baby is sleeping, their eyes are closed, but you are not sleeping because they are so loud and you're sharing a room with them, and that is impacting your physical and mental health, like that is something that we have to consider when making the decision to move your baby out of the room. So it's really just talking about like risk benefit for baby and parents. And there are some parents who are going to weigh those risk benefits and they're going to move their baby out of their room in the first 4 weeks. And there are other parents who maybe don't move their baby out of the room until they're 10, 11, 12 months. But happy to help make that decision if that's something that you need help making, or just validating if you've already done it that it's okay. It is absolutely okay.
Just like a really fun, just like a quick story, not fun, I don't know why I said that. Losing sleep and being sleep deprived and trying to get your babies on a sleep schedule is really not that fun. It's hard. But the self-soothing thing is interesting. And I just want to share quickly. Yeah. When my babies, both of my girls, probably between 4 and 6 months, really like the first year, once I started laying them down for a nap by themselves and I would leave the room, they always cried. The crying out method didn't work for me and my family. So what I would do is, which is sort of what you suggest, I would give myself a task. So it's like, okay, I'm going to unload the dishwasher. Yes. If they're still crying when I'm done, I will go in there. So I was weak. If I didn't give myself something to do and like a physical task, I would go in right away. But it was so funny. 90% of the time I would say, I'm going to do this. And if they're still crying, then I'll go in. And they always stopped crying.
So Sarah, that's not, first of all, that's not you being weak, right?
It's it's so hard to like think of anything other than going to save them.
No, I know, but it's also like the traditional advice or strategy for you, which is like, let them cry it out and don't go into the room while you sit there and stare at the monitor, right? It doesn't work for you, and candidly doesn't work for most. Like,
no, it's so
I tell
hard.
people, like, leave the monitor at home with your partner and go for a walk around the block with the dog, right? Mm-hmm. And to your point, like, because it's hard to listen sometimes to your kid cry. And not sometimes, it's always hard to listen to your kid cry. But yeah, like that, I think that's such a good tip, Sarah. I love that. Yeah, like do something to occupy you for a set amount of time, right? Mm-hmm. And then decide how you're going to react after that.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So now, all right, so we moved from doing nothing to your baby actually being awake and trying to soothe them back to sleep first, right? To now, like, okay, they're awake and we've decided they need to feed. Okay. So when we're doing a feed overnight, the thing that can be most helpful with like keeping that feed efficient and getting them back to sleep and you back to sleep as fast as possible is decreasing stimulation, right? So couple things. One is like around 6 weeks is when your baby's metabolism starts to slow down overnight, which means that you're less likely to get as many overnight poops, if any, than you've been having in those first 6 weeks. Okay. So you can stop changing your baby's diaper overnight if it's just wet. This means maybe like sizing up in the diaper that you're putting them in, maybe utilizing overnight diapers because, you know, they get pretty wet. And only changing them if they have a poop so you can smell it, or maybe while you're feeding them, they actually like have a bowel movement while you're feeding them, or maybe like they actually soaked through the diaper that you had on and you need to change them, right? So tip number one is if you don't need to change them, don't. If you do need to change them, change the diaper at the beginning of the feed or the middle of the feed. And so that's so that the stimulation is happening at the beginning of the feed or the middle of the feed, so that you're ending the feed with your baby swaddled in a clean diaper, ready to be put right back down, right? So if they do fall asleep at the end of the feed, which is what we're shooting for, right? If they can fall asleep at the end of the feed, it's going to be easier to put them down. Then they're ready to just be put right back down. It's not like they're falling asleep at that end of the feed, and then you're changing their diaper and swaddling them and just waking them back up, right? So, so that's like tip number one with the diaper. Tip number two with like the swaddling is if you're not changing their diaper, you can just pick them up in their swaddle and feed them. Like stop unswaddling them overnight, right? Pick them up, feed them, try and burp them for a minute or two, like I was just talking about. If you get a burp out, great. If you don't, it's okay. Nothing bad's going to happen. You can put them right back down. All right. If you're in maybe those first 2 or 4 weeks, right? Maybe you're still trying to get your baby to regain their birth weight. Maybe you have noticed a trend where if they only feed on one side, they only sleep for like an hour. But if they feed on both sides, they'll sleep for another 3 hours, right? Then what you can do is like maybe, you know, pick them, unswaddle them, feed them on one side, then change their diaper, and then feed them on the other side to try and keep them stimulated enough to feed on the other side, right? I'm going to get to not force feeding them, but this is where like you can utilize the diaper change or the unswaddling as a way to wake them up if you're trying to get in the other side or a few more ounces from a bottle. Okay. Other thing that I want you to keep an eye out for is lights and noises. So like we're not turning on like an overhead light, like a dim light is the way to go. Trying not to like, you know, when they're changing their diaper, like, you know, maybe not singing them a song while you're doing it. So really trying to keep noise and lights low, keep that stimulation low to help with them recognizing that it's night and we're just going to feed and go right back to sleep. Okay. So that's decreasing stimulation overnight. This is the part on don't force feeding. Okay. So I just talked about like, maybe there is a scenario where you are trying to wake them up a little bit more to get in that extra feed, right? Or that those extra few ounces or the other side of your breastfeeding, right? But there will come a time. So maybe that's in the first 0 to 6 weeks, right? And you notice this trend where like, if they don't take both sides, then, you know, they only sleep for an hour. And if they do, then they sleep for 2 or 3 hours, right? So totally get that, play into that trend. But if you have a kid who was maybe taking both sides and then would sleep for another 3 hours and now is only taking one side or was taking 6 ounces, is now taking 4. And they really like, don't like you're force feeding them, like trying to get them to take more because you think they're going to sleep more. But when you actually put them down, they still sleep another 3 hours. Don't try and get in those extra calories or ounces, right? Because now you have a kid who's naturally starting to take in less overnight and still sleeping the same amount of time. That's a good thing, right? Because then what that means is they'll start taking in more calories during the day and start to sleep even longer stretches of sleep at night, right? So what we don't want to do is miss the cue where our baby's saying, hey, I don't need as much overnight anymore. I can still sleep just as long. Force feed those ounces in just for them to continue taking less ounces during the day and not actually play into the trend of them sleeping longer. Okay. So I said trend a few times, like look at that trend, right? Is it trending that they need the calories in order to sleep longer? Or is it trending that you just think they need the calories, but actually they can sleep just as long with less ounces or calories? Okay. So if you pick up your baby and you breastfeed them for only 5 minutes, don't stress about it only being a 5-minute feed or only being 3 ounces if they still sleep just as long or longer, because they're going to make up for those feeds during the day. Okay.
Hey, Jamie.
Yeah.
Can I stop you really quick about like less stimulation in the diaper changes? We have a mom asking, so laying in wet diapers for hours is okay. After dealing with some pretty bad diaper rashes early first couple weeks of life, we now change it every time they see the indicator. Is there a time limit?
Yeah, so with what causes the diaper rash isn't urine, isn't the wetness from urine, it's actually poop. So kids who sit in poops for too long, like there are kids who get a diaper rash when they sit in a poop for 5 or 10 minutes, and there are kids who can sit in a poop for 5 hours and they don't get a diaper rash. Really just depends on like their skin type. But that's why I'm saying change it with poops. That will cause or can cause a diaper rash, but pee won't. What I tell people too is like, when you're doing this, like take on the like a diaper cream, like a triple paste or the Desitin, something that has the zinc oxide in it, so it's going to be white. That can really help in terms of like the skin protectant. If you're unsure, right, or if you are dealing with a bad diaper rash, then it's again totally fine to change their diaper. I'm not saying you can't change their diaper, right? Just change up maybe how you're doing it. Do it at the beginning of the feed or the middle of the feed, right? Or maybe start the feed. And then when you're, 5 minutes out from finishing or a few ounces left in the bottle, stop the feed, change the diaper, and then come back to it and finish it in a clean diaper, swaddles, and ready to be put right back down.
Okay, thank you. I think that helps. Another question from another mom. Yeah. Can I put my baby right down after feeding and burping? I've noticed sometimes she spits up if we burp her and put her down. So I've been keeping her on my chest for about 7 to 10 minutes before putting her back down overnight in case she spits up.
Yep. So spit up in babies is different than adults. Like we've all been conditioned to believe, right, that like the drunk person, you have to put a sleep on their side because if they like vomit in their sleep, then they're going to aspirate and choke and die, right? That's not what happens with babies. So actually the way that babies' anatomy is with their trachea and their esophagus, so their breathing and feeding tubes, is that if they were to spit up while lying on their back, it actually comes out the side of their mouth and it doesn't cause them to choke. So if your baby spit, and some of you probably have noticed this, right? Like your baby might have a large amount of spit up on their onesie or in their crib when you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh my God, I had no idea. Like, how did that happen? But it's actually like, it typically doesn't cause any harm to them and it just falls out the side of their mouth, regardless of the volume, and will not cause them to choke or anything bad to happen.
Okay.
Just anatomical difference of babies and adults.
So the answer is yes, she can put her baby down after feeding and burping.
The answer is yes, she can put her baby down
delayed spit up.
and not have to keep her upright for 7 to 10 minutes.
Okay, got it. Unless you want.
Oh, she has to. Yeah, totally.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. So the next piece that I wanted to touch on, and then this is actually like the last slide, and then I can come out and answer more questions, is just setting realistic expectations of how babies tend to drop feeds overnight. So somewhere around 12 weeks, right? Some babies do this a little bit sooner, maybe around the 6 or 8 week mark. Some babies do this a little bit later, maybe around the 14 week mark. But sometime around the 12 week mark, your baby is going to start to go to bed a little bit earlier, right? So for newborns, for babies up until, again, maybe 3-ish months, typically your daytime hours are a little bit longer, right? Maybe they're more like 6, 7 a.m. to like 9, 10 p.m., right? And then your overnight hours are more like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., right? So shorter overnights, longer daytime hours. Once your baby backs up their bedtime, so starts going to sleep maybe between like 7 and 8 p.m., right? What you typically then see is kids who have this overnight cycle of going to bed around 7, 8 p.m. and waking up for the day around 7 a.m., okay? And when you do that, most babies have about 3 feeds a night, right? So they have that first feed around 10 p.m., that second feed around 1 a.m., and that third feed around 4 a.m., all right? And when they start to, if they start to naturally drop feeds on their own, right? Like you put them to bed and all of a sudden, like the first time you hear them wake up is at 1 a.m. So they drop that 10 p.m. feed. They typically drop that first feeding of the night first, the 10 p.m. feeding first, the third feeding of the night second, so that 4 a.m. feeding second, and the middle of the night feeding last, right? Which feels like a real buzzkill because like, I don't know if you all are like me, but if I could get rid of any feeding, it would be that one in the middle of the night, right? Because that's the one that lines up with my sleep. So this is where when babies drop that first feeding of the night, right? So I was talking about like that 10 p.m. feed. Now the baby's sleeping from 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. That's a great stretch of sleep, right? The buzzkill is that you're not usually sleeping from 7 p.m. until 1 a.m., right? So this is where, if you've heard this concept around a dream feed, I can dive into this more if anybody's interested, but where people will introduce a dream feed, which is basically where you put your baby down at 7 p.m. and then about 2 hours after bedtime, so around 9 p.m., you would go into the room, you would pick your baby up asleep, and you would offer them a breastfeeding or a bottle feeding session while they're in their sleep, and then put them back down into their crib or their bassinet, like all happening basically while they're asleep. So with the hope that they'll then now sleep from 9 p.m. when you're going to bed, right, until 3 a.m., right? So trying to get that, so we had this 7 p.m. to 1 a.m., right, which was what? How many hours of sleep? 6 hours of sleep? Yeah. Now we're trying to get that 6 hours of sleep to align with your sleep. So 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., right? Dream feeds are great if they work. Like, reasons why they don't work is like your baby's so dead asleep that they won't feed. That you do the dream feed and they still wake up at 1 a.m. So it's not really getting you or your baby any more sleep. Or you do a dream feed and they actually like wake up and now they're like wide awake because you woke them up from a deep sleep, and it takes another hour, hour and a half, 2 hours to get them to fall asleep. Okay. So you don't have to do a dream feed. It's kind of like a hot topic right now, but if it's helpful at all, I didn't do a dream feed with any of my kids. They just naturally drop their feeds in this order. And then there are some kids who, maybe at 3, 4, 5 months, they naturally drop all these feeds overnight. There are some kids who still hold on to 1 to 2 feeds after 5, 6 plus months old. And maybe you decide that's okay. Maybe you decide that you want to do some sleep training, right? So some babies are going to naturally drop 1, 2, or all of these feeds. Other babies may need a little bit of help in dropping those feeds. And that's where we could talk about maybe doing some sleep training. All right. All right, that was the last slide. I do, Sarah will send this information in a follow-up email for you all too, but there is a QR code on here because through NAPS, we have this whole online member platform. And actually we have a member on here, but it's called Nurture by NAPS. On this platform, we have courses, pre-recorded courses. So like they're all short and sweet, like 2 to 6 minutes long. So we have a course on dream feeds. We have a course on what it looks like for your baby to take in more calories and ounces during the day. We have a course on transitioning out of the swaddle and switching your baby out of your room. So there's all those pre-recorded courses. We also have our Ask a Nurse message board. So you can ask us a question 24/7 and get a response within 24 hours. So that's our Ask a Nurse board. And then we have live sessions like this, not necessarily workshop, but you can just hop on and ask myself, a nurse, or another nurse or nurse practitioner on our team questions and get that answer to your question live on that call. We offer those calls at least twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. So as part of the Populous community, you guys actually get $150 off either the annual membership, so you can pay for the entire year, or this covers your first month free. So that's a QR code. This is the code that you can use to get your month free or to get $150 off the annual membership, but just wanted to have this as an option for you all. If you wanted to connect with me directly on the platform, if you have additional questions after this workshop. So that's it.
And I'll put that in all that information, you guys, will be in the post-webinar email on how you can access that and get your discount. So we have a question, Jamie, from Molly. How do you know when to move up the bedtime?
Yeah, so there's usually like 2 indications to move up the bedtime, and they're opposites, right? One, which is typically the most common, is like where before you had a kid where like maybe you did a feed at 7, right? And then an hour later, they took a nap and they napped from 8 to 8:45, right? And then they woke up and they had another feed around like 9, 9:30, and then they went to bed at 10. Like that actually like felt pretty easy. They'd wake up, feed, take another nap, wake up, feed, and then go to bed. Now that kid is just like screaming from 7 to 10. Or you're trying to put them down to like for a nap and they're just like not having it. So it goes from like, I don't want to say the evenings are ever easy, right? But goes from like easier to like kind of like the wheels have come off and it's kind of a nightmare. That's usually an indication that it's time for an earlier bedtime. Or opposite end of the spectrum, you have the baby who you're feeding at 7, you put them down for that nap at 8. And when you put them down for that nap at 8, they're like dead asleep at 9:30. And then it's like approaching 10 and you're like, do I wake them up? Do I let them feed? Like, I don't know what to do. And then you're waking them up and they're super sleepy, but like, then you finally get them all the way awake and now it's hard to get them back to sleep. So it's either like, it's a disaster or they're like dead asleep and you're like, what do I do? And again, that can happen as early as maybe 6 weeks, as late as 12, 13, 14 weeks.
For the people that are expecting their first, can you explain to them the concept in terms of the witching hour? means?
Yes. So the witching hour is really okay. So like the witching hour just tends to be in the evening time when your baby's just a little bit fussy, right? Think about it in the context of like it's no different than us. Like
Really? Yeah.
a long day, right? Or maybe not even coming home, maybe just a long day home with your kids, right? And like everybody's hungry and tired at like 5 and 6 o'clock, right? And like, I mean, at least this is how my life is. And I like can vouch that like I'm just not my best self in the evening, right? Like babies don't really show up as their best selves in the evening. Okay. So like that doesn't mean like everybody just has to grin and bear it because it's not easy to do because you're already exhausted from the day too, right? But maybe this is like, okay, let's think about tools that we can utilize, right? Is your partner around and you've been home with the baby all day? Do you need to pass that baby off to your partner, right? And you actually go outside for a walk. Is it actually that you need to get outside and just go for a walk? If you put the baby in the carrier or the stroller and you go for a walk at 6, 7 p.m., right? Like, does that actually help? Is it time to do a bath? Does your baby actually really enjoy the bath? And like, that'll buy you a little bit of time during this fussy period, right? Is it just that you're walking around the house with the swaddle baby, swinging them and shushing them for, half hour or 40 minutes because that's the only thing that works. Mm-hmm. So it's really just about like, understanding that you have maybe other people who you can tap in or other tools that you can utilize during that time. Yeah.
You see these questions that came in? Yeah.
Yeah. Like Sarah, like my 9, 7, and 5-year-old also have a witching hour, right? It just feels different when it's a baby and you're like, what's wrong?
I also have a witching hour. I just can control my emotions a little bit better. Okay. So we have a few of the two people have the same question. Do you see Jillian's right there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So baby struggling to, I don't know if you guys can, this is so cool. How did that happen?
Magic.
I love this feature. Jillian, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot. Baby struggles to nap with all the help, 5 S's, but takes 20 to 30 minutes. How do you know if it's overtired or not enough stimulation during the daytime period? If your baby is less than 5, 6 months old, I can almost guarantee, which I know your baby is, I can almost guarantee you it is that they are overtired. Like pretty much, I don't want to say it's unheard of, but pretty much unheard of for babies like within the first 4 or 5 months for it to be that they're not tired enough. So what I would first do, Jillian, is actually just like try and get your baby down like 10 to 15 minutes earlier than you already are and see if that helps. If that doesn't, like I have a whole hierarchy here of how to deal with like kids who are really struggling during the day. Like 1 is, are they getting enough to eat? 2 is, are they overtired and like managing that? So I'm telling you to address 2, but there are like 3 or 4 other things on my hierarchy here. So if that doesn't work, I would definitely want to hear from you to be able to address like if there's something else going on. Do you care if I take Jen's?
You want to take Jen's? Yeah, and Meredith had the same one, so I think you answered both. Yep.
Right. So I'm exclusively breastfeeding. I'm not sure how many ounces my little is getting per feed. Some are 30 minutes, some are 60 minutes. I'd like to introduce bottles. Is there a recommended method to know how many ounces is best? Yes, Jen. So I'll give you guys a little bit of a formula, different ways to think about this. There's also a great video on our platform, the Nurture platform. It's called How to Know My Baby's Getting Enough. And it actually explains the breakdown of like how much your baby's taking is like, could be taking as like a 2-week-old, whether you're breastfeeding or bottle feeding, and how that changes as they start to sleep longer stretches of sleep at night and take in more during the day. So it's just really helpful. But first, Jen, so general rule of thumb is that babies will take in about 1 to 1.5 ounces per hour. So if it's been 3 hours since your baby's last feed, it's likely that they'll take between like 3 and 4.5 ounces at a feed. So I would start with introducing a bottle of 3 ounces. And if they want a little bit more, they can have another ounce or 2. Okay. But general rule of thumb is about 1 to 1.5 ounces per feed. Other thing that I just like to tell people, and I'll use the opportunity to do this, is babies consume the same total ounces in 24 hours from their time they're like 2-3 weeks old until their time they're like 6+ months old. So if your baby's taking in, and I know you won't know this if you're like exactly how much of you're breastfeeding, right? But most babies take in between 24 to 32 ounces a day. So if your baby's taking in 24 ounces as a 1-month-old, they're going to continue to take 24 ounces until they're 6+ months old. It's not like they start taking in more volume, not until you start solid foods. That's something different, right? So don't feel like the volume increases in how much they take in each feed when they start to drop feeds overnight and they take more during the day. Okay, so just important distinction.
From Bridget.
Cluster feeding lasts, still happening for us frequently at 8 weeks between 5 and 9 p.m. So, Bridget, my question to you would be like, after this cluster feeding session between 5 to 9 with an 8-week-old, does your 8-week-old then go to sleep and sleep pretty well overnight? If that's the case, this is still considered normal. And cluster feeding sessions usually last, like you said, between like this 3-4 hour time frame and can happen up until about 12 weeks. So if your baby is doing this, but then goes on to bed to sleep well, I wouldn't necessarily try and change the cluster feeding. Maybe I would just try and change your strategies for dealing with the cluster feeding. Like maybe you do have your partner give, a 1 or 2 ounce bottle just to give your breasts a break, right? If you're breastfeeding. So just a thought there. What else? Bottle introduction is not going great thus far. Trying for the first feeding around 12 to 2 a.m. Okay. Takes them 45 minutes to an hour to get through bottle and fighting, moving around a lot to suggest. Okay. So my first question, Sarah, is, are you trying to feed this baby who's not hungry? So like going back to the question of like, are their eyes closed and we're actually trying to feed a baby who's not hungry? Just a thought, but may not be the case. Other things that I would think about, are you warming the bottle up? Like if your baby's used to getting breast milk, which comes out at a hot 98.6 degrees, like does the bottle need to be warmed up a little bit more? How is your partner trying to, I don't know, I'm assuming it's your partner, maybe not, but how's your partner trying to give the bottle? If you turn babies on their side to feed with the bottle, that is more of an intuitive way that babies eat. So just turning them on their side and offering them the bottle while the baby's on their side may be helpful. There's actually a whole course in Nurture that's called Bottle Troubles and Refusals. So there's like 6 or 7 tips in that course that may be helpful. But my first suspicion is you probably don't have to try a different bottle or maybe not a different size either. It's probably more about how the bottle is actually being offered.
Okay.
And we're glad to hear your 8-week-old is sleeping well. Don't change anything. Just maybe like have somebody help you with the cluster feeding, because that's annoying if doesn't matter if you're bottle or breastfeeding or you're doing long feeds, it can be annoying.
I remember cluster feeding and just feeling so, I feel like every hour my fuse would just get shorter and shorter and shorter. It was so hard because you just had an entire day with your newborn, and it's just, and the last couple hours of the day are just like brutal.
Well, and it's that like they're touching you and you're touched out. Like there's a lot there. There's the physical piece, there's the emotional piece. Right? There's a lot happening.
Okay.
All right.
We're at time.
I know.
I feel like we could just sit here for the rest of our Friday afternoon and talk about sleep.
Totally could. If you ever want to do that, Sarah, let me know.
We should just have like an afternoon where it's like office hours and just like come hang out with us. What's on your mind?
Like the great part about that, and I mean, this is like what we do on Nurture, right? Like it's an hour and people just hop on and ask any questions from pregnancy to sleep to feeding to returning to work to potty training. I'll talk about anything with you guys for an hour.
For the record, we also need a session on toddler sleep because I am convinced it might actually be worse than newborn sleep. I'm so sorry to scare any of you for the future, but my 5-year-old likes to wake up multiple times a night and she wants a snack or she wants to watch TV and it is 3 a.m. and I don't know what to do. So anyway, all that to be said, I hope you guys take advantage of the offer that Jamie has prepared for you guys to join NAPS, because these resources were not available to me. At least maybe they were. I just didn't know about them. And that is why I have these sessions to introduce you guys trusted resources and experts that can just help you with this life stage and milestone. It's so hard. And there are people out there who want to make this transition easier for you and your family. So please go try it and let us know what you think. And you obviously had someone in here who loves you and is like best decision.
It looks like I planted somebody, but I swear I had no idea how they were coming.
Okay, well, thank you, Jamie, and thank you guys so much for being here and spending some time with us on Friday morning. The recording will be in the post-webinar email, including resources that Jamie's prepared, information for, and the discount for joining NAPS. And we're around on social if you guys have more questions or want to chat. So
yeah, if you guys send them today, I'll be on the message board this weekend, so I can answer any questions that you have as you try and implement some of these strategies. So just really excited to connect with you all.
Thanks, you guys. Appreciate you being here. See you soon.
Right. Bye. Bye.
I don't know if you guys are still on. I'm going to take a video.